Good day, everyone. This is Rita Choi, founder of Asia HRM. Happy New Year to all of you. Do you miss me or our sessions? So Asia HRM is the human resources community for Asia, focusing on leadership and coaching. We help organizations build high-performing teams. We are also an advocate for coaching. So we do have a coaching platform called Coaching Engage Plus, connecting qualified coaches with their potential clients. Our vision is to make coaching affordable and accessible to everybody in the world. And if you interested in AI coaching, do let us know. Do contact us. As a continuation of our HR Leaders series for Singapore, the topic for today is psychological safety. I'm sure that this topic is not something new to you, right? Especially when you are an HR professional. However, this topic is so important for us that as an employee, we really need to feel psychological safe in an environment so that we can speak up. And today, we are very glad that we have an expert, Miss Danielle Leenders, who is going to talk about this topic. Safety across cultures, driving well-being in diverse teams. How do cultural backgrounds, communication norms, and representation shape the sense of safety in your team? Danielle is going to talk about it. She has over 17 years of HR experience, working across international and regional roles. She is the founder of an international HR advisory called, very special name, Click to R. And his organization supports company with cross-border people and employment challenges. Something very interested to know that she was born in Hong Kong, same as me, and she's now based in Singapore. So without further ado, I would love to introduce you to Danielle. And Danielle is going to walk us through a deck that she has prepared, followed by Q&A. For those of you who are watching us today, please say hi in the comment box. And of course, you can also leave your questions or comments in the comment box. Danielle, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. Thank you for this very beautiful introduction. I'm very moved. Hello everyone joining us on LinkedIn Live. Welcome to this session. I really appreciate getting this stage and expressing some of my thoughts on this topic. And as you will find out, it's quite personal to me. So as already introduced, my name is Danielle Leenders. I run a company called Click to HR. And let's just jump right into it. So why is this topic psychological safety, especially in the multicultural, intercultural context of Singapore, where I live and work right now, so personal to me? It's really grown out of the fact that I was born in Hong Kong, half Chinese, half Dutch, looking the way I do. And the typical response is that I don't look Chinese. So growing up, I never really fit in anywhere. And everywhere I went, I was the outsider, the foreigner, the minority. And that was not always very easy. That made me very sensitive to the rooms I was in and the mood. And I had this deep desire to always fit in and belong. And to do that, I became a keen observer of what was going on. How does the rules of the room work? So during my very first years of HR experience, I was working in Central Europe, in Germany, and I observed that the behaviors of other cultures, and in that case, it was often Eastern European countries, was looked at from a Western lens. And the thought that I heard often was, oh, they are not as proactive. And based on my personal experiences with people of those countries, I didn't quite agree. So I created this hypothesis that lack of proactivity was unnoticed because of the lens that they were applying. So in my postgraduate thesis, an academic piece of a study that I did, I compared Eastern European cultural behaviors of proactivity. It's not Eastern, but let's say universal ways of measuring it with the German ways. And I hypothesized that they show just as much proactivity or even more, but they were just not noticing it because they were paying attention to different things. Well, in conclusion, the many, many months it took to complete my work proved that I was not suitable for a career in academia or research. But fortunately, it also disproved that Eastern Europeans were less proactive because of the broadened measurements that I considered to measure proactivity. So from my academia, I went on to further 16 years of HR career in large corporates, mostly international MNCs. And just last year, I made the decision to start my own business. And what we do is that we support internationally operating companies with HR operations and compliance. So we're very execution focused for companies operating in Southeast Asia. But our area of specialization is really to say, how do we translate your global HR standards or your intent of what you're trying to achieve to be compliant, but also culturally effective and appropriate on the ground. And I think many of you here in the room, if you're HR professionals, you might be in a similar situation where you support internationally headquartered companies, bringing things into Singapore or into the region, or you might be the regional or global headquarter and you're bringing out things, rolling out things and processes into the countries and markets that you support. So the topic today is about psychological safety, but the psychological one. And the textbook definition, a modern textbook definition, influenced by Amy Edmondson's and the like, is that we try to measure, is it safe to speak up? Can someone admit their mistakes publicly? Can they challenge their manager? And we try to measure these beliefs and behaviors, and in the context of the company, that would be that it does not have negative consequences. But living and working in Singapore, and maybe in other places of Asia for other people outside of Singapore dialing in, we probably know that these are not really culturally neutral behaviors, speaking up, contradicting. So I would caution to equate feeling psychological safe to directness, having consensus, to feel comfortable, or even performance, because I believe we have very highly performing teams, but that does not necessarily mean that we have psychological safety. Why is that? And I want to try to visualize it with a virtual room of 100 employees in an international company here in Singapore. And this is not an exact statistic, okay? This is meant to be more demonstrative. So in that example room, we likely have around 60 Singaporeans. Majority of them will be Chinese. So about a third of those Singaporeans have international experience or education. We might perceive them to be more outspoken. Another third have a purely local work and education experience, and they might be more context sensitive. And another third are Singaporeans of different ethnic and cultural minorities, and their sense of safety might be influenced by the lack of representation that they are seeing in the room, the lack of role models that they are seeing in their lives, in the community, in the company, but also whether their traditions, celebrations are accommodated, accepted, and also understood. Then who else is in the room? We have maybe around 10 very generalized terms here, guys. I mean, I want to make a disclaimer that we'll be making some generalizations without claiming that, this applies to everyone. We will have about 10 Western professionals, so from Europe, US, maybe Australia. They might be perceived to be much more outspoken and confident. And interestingly enough, they are also more frequently represented in more senior and leadership roles, sometimes even sent from abroad, from headquarters, on expat arrangements for temporary stays in Singapore. For many of these, Singapore, their stay here, will be intended to be temporary. Some may or may not have wanted to be here. Then we have the third group, which is also quite large in a place like Singapore, maybe up to 30% or so professionals from other Asian countries. And these are very qualified. They may or may not be English native speakers, or at least they won't have the same accent as the boss. So these are 100 people with very different experiences of what psychological safety means to them. So let's look at that, especially last group of Asian professionals. Now, their ability and their family and children to pursue education, to stay in Singapore, is directly tied to their job security, which in Singapore, honestly, is not very high. Their job can be terminated easily at any time. They have often come to Singapore for hopes of a better life for their family. So the loss of their job would often mean a return to their home country, which might not necessarily be desirable. So all these 100 people are perfectly capable at what they do, and they're there because they're good at what they do. But the weight of the question, what happens if this goes wrong, is a very, very different one. So let's look at the Singapore business context. And, we might see similar in places like Hong Kong, for example. But Singapore businesses generally tend to follow a very Western business norm. And the employees in these businesses are fluent in these norms. But personally, each individual, the employees, they have enjoyed decades of cultural conditioning and upbringing based on their respective cultures and families. So this might have Confucian, Buddhist, Muslim, Hindu, Sikh values. And we have many, many different ethnicities, religions, and different Asian cultures that we cannot just generalize. But what they have a lot in common are certain norms about respect, hierarchy, restraint, and harmony, which are often very different to the more individualistic cultures that we have, for example, in the US and Europe. So they have learned to succeed in this work and company systems, but these systems were never really designed for them. And that could result in an experience of kind of constant inner struggle between deep-rooted values and kind of the external expectations of working in such businesses, which I assume is probably pretty exhausting. And for us as HR professionals and leaders, it is very hard to tell how people are doing, because on the surface, our teams look fine, they are polite, they are efficient, they're doing well, they're productive, but there is a sense of self-censorship. And what that leads to as an outcome for the businesses is that risks and ideas that are important to manage or also to benefit from are not being shared, are not being raised. And also potentially there is this quiet disengagement and resentment that builds up with our employees that we might not be able to see. So that is why we care about the psychological safety. So coming back to the Western kind of business standards that we have, is that we often also see that the leaders and the decision makers, whether they are, local here or decisions being made from, headquarters elsewhere, said they are often either Western trained or, Western people. Right? In our headquarters, these people define what good leadership looks like. For example, what do we reward? What are our promotion criteria? And typically, these are things that are very closely tied to what we defined initially as psychological safety. Those are the people that speak up, that are seen, and take place in the room. So if we take that as a definition of what good looks like, we keep hearing and rewarding the same people. So we need to ask ourselves, whose version of good are we actually rewarding? If we're sharing these norms. And it's important to note that these norms are not wrong, they're just not culturally neutral. And I think that is important to keep in mind in this multicultural context that we operate in here, especially in the Asia Pacific region. So people are always watching who is being promoted, who isn't, who gets sidelined, who is in the room, who is no longer there, who is at the table. And I believe many of you will have kind of your own examples of these kind of scenarios. So take one of my recent examples of something I went through as we were going through a promotional cycle. So May, she is a Chinese origin team leader, and she is a deep subject matter expert. She has a lot of knowledge and a lot of local experience. She knows how things work and can work very efficiently with her team to get things done. In meetings, though, especially with international leaders, she usually listened more than she spoke. And when she did contribute, she was very precise and considered, and usually did a lot of analysis before she shared her ideas. Her Australian peer, Dan, so he does exactly the same job. He always spoke up in meetings, usually friendly banter and small talk. But he had less experience in the subject matter and also less experience in the local market. But in the meetings, he was definitely perceived to be more influential. In his team members, if you ask them, is that he is a very nice guy. And he is very chatty and easy to get along with, but he does not really know a lot about what is going on. And they often had to fix things in the background. Now, guess who got promoted? I think it's implied that it was Dan who got promoted. And you will see that in a situation like that, is that no one will say anything usually. But the point is that everyone notices that it happens, right? And that is how people learn what good is considered in a particular organization. And May did not become quiet because she was afraid, because she did not feel safe necessarily. But May was maybe a bit more quiet because of deeply ingrained norms and values, where she values substance over performance. And she refuses to contradict some of her inner values just to be performative, right? And as organizations, we run the risk of losing people like that, that are high performers, and the people who identify with, that kind of values as well. And that can result in people leaving, but also a more slow internal process where, they quietly withdraw. So when our leaders are homogenous in terms of their nationality or gender communication side, safety will very much depend on personal bravery to overcome that and say, oh yeah, I will just kind of overcome this, and I'm willing and able to change. And I've had this discussion with leaders and HR a lot. So yeah, but isn't that just like a development, a development for someone to learn to speak up? But if it's always the same people that need to develop towards a particular standard, it's always one group of people, one side, then who is really carrying that cost of adaptation? And is that really development or assimilation, right? But when we have leadership that rewards a diverse range of behaviors, then safety becomes more structural and it widens what good looks like. And I think everyone benefits from that, right? It's not just this group versus that group. It allows people not to have to invest so much energy into code switching, and they get the permission to be more true to themselves and can recognize themselves in those different behaviors, and that there is more than one way to succeed. So and also that's where the point of representation matters, that they can see themselves represented in those opportunities and see the possibility, which is much, much more motivating. And all this, psychological safety also is closely tied to, like I said before, like diversity and that belonging and inclusion, which are all not just word and statements we put on slides and on the walls. And another important point is, as we just had Christmas and New Year, a week back, is holidays and traditions. And that is really whose or which do we protect and hold holy, and which ones are maybe more negotiable. So one of my experiences had been that, that we were doing a large restructure, and, Christmas was like, no go, don't touch. But very fast in January, we're like, okay, now we execute on that restructuring with Chinese New Year or Lunar New Year just around the corner. And in the Asia Pac region, that is a very significant holiday. So it did not matter that the predominantly Chinese HR and leaders and employees had to carry the burden of that decision being rolled out during the Lunar New Year. So those are all little signs that employees, notice and absorb as well. And then it's also which holidays or traditions are we more aware and knowledgeable, or maybe even curious about, and which we maybe choose to be more agnostic about. So, for example, when I just came to Singapore, I would ask my Singaporean colleagues about the different holidays, like, oh, what are they celebrating? What are the traditions? And what often happens was when it was, for example, about some of the Muslim holidays, and I asked my Chinese colleagues, is that they would not know. And I found that quite curious that that no one, everyone's celebrating the public holiday. No one has actually stopped to ask themselves that question. So this way, employees, all the different employees that we have in our businesses, they learn, they notice which parts of them are welcome and which parts are better kept private. Things like I mentioned, their holidays, but also things like prayer times or fasting or their caregiving expectations, or maybe making a point out of their nutritional requirements like halal or vegetarian when there's team situations or events. These are also all parts of being safe. When it comes to psychological safety, most of the time, it breaks down vertically. What that means is that psychological safety is very much determined by our managers, our leaders, right? And interestingly, that can be past or present. Employees have a very good memory for things that happened in the past, and are quite seem to struggle to let some of those things go, even when perhaps leaders or situations have changed. So that shows also how sensitive they are to these nuances, and also sensitive to risk. So people are always watching. What happens when there are mistakes? What happens when I disagree with the boss? What happens when someone speaks up? Who gets interrupted? Who gets listened to? So, and they're keeping like a mental tally subconsciously, of course, of what is happening. And then back to the cultural, and everyone is very different, but back to the cultural aspect is what someone perceives as a threat to their safety is also very personal. Because we all have different communication styles, the directness of a leader in a meeting, for example, putting someone on the spot, may be perceived by someone as quite aggressive, or even losing face and embarrassment in front of the group, which would be like a big risk to take. So in a more direct culture, that's just normal, but to be confronted like that might be a high price to pay for someone. So to kind of bring this to, so what, right? What are we going to do as HR professionals and leaders? I'm going to put the disclaimer that I understand that this is not an easy fix, right? And for those of us who are employees, specifically also in HR, I trust that this is very challenging, because we are also employees often, right? And I'll be honest, when I was an employee, and it happened more than once, where I, called things out or gave pushback, that I have felt threatened, that my, job security is on the line by taking that risk, right? So there is only so much we can do, or so much that we decide that we're willing to do for the greater good, right? So we need our own safety as well. I believe that as HR professionals, that we can support in designing the system. We are not the leaders necessarily ourselves, and we cannot fully control them. But in designing the system, we can define the promotion criteria. We can influence how performance decisions and calibrations are made. What is considered good leadership? How do we train our leaders? And how do we deal with performance issues? Essentially, what gets rewarded and what gets punished. There are systems that we can support to create, to shed light on those biases that might be here, and also to, shed attention on other things that we might want to highlight more of. So what we really need to look out for, and that is how these issues tend to pop up, is the famous PIP, the performance improvement plan, when someone is not doing very well. And we might hear phrases like, oh, they're not proactive, they don't speak up, they're disengaged. And we get brought in as HR professionals to manage the performance. So it is in those situations where we play a role in noticing whether there are patterns around certain leaders. Do these kind of cases tend to accumulate when we interact with those leaders or attend their meetings? How do they respond in those interactions? Do they push back? Because a PIP, a performance improvement plan, in an environment which is not safe, it doesn't really fix performance. It just legitimizes fear, and that would not be fair. So whilst we cannot force leaders to become safe, we can help to design the system to make that unsafe leadership visible. So when you hear something like that, someone is not proactive, speak up, it's quite easy to agree, oh, that is an issue. They might not be performing. But something I would like to encourage you to do is to, if you're not already doing that, of course, I trust that there are many very experienced folks out there, is that to look at the performance in multiple contexts and not just in the obvious visible one. And the first, question of the context would be, how do they perform in their primary work, right? So what are the key results and deliverables and the quality that we would expect from this role? How are they performing on that? And not what is the performance there, in a meeting, for example, right? So that is the first context that needs to be assessed. Then the second context is, how are peers and clients or other key stakeholders, not necessarily just upwards, because that's where the hierarchy comes in, how are they perceiving them, right? Get feedback from them, right? About their knowledge, about their performance, about their communication. Are they solving problems? That's the second context. And the third context for the leader, or as a kind of system and organization of communication, is, what are your different channels for contribution? And that there are different ways of approaching this, but to really understand that the person have other opportunities to contribute rather than just in that classical group meeting scenario. And that could be things like, having time to read the agenda or to think about it, and maybe to give written feedback or suggestions, but also one-on-one meetings, for example. Some people do better in smaller settings. So I'm sure as part of this, you have a lot of ideas of different tools that you could implement, right? So like anonymous feedback, surveys, 360 degrees, idea management, the way you organize meetings, whether that is rotating the chair of the meetings, making someone a devil's advocate. And these can all help with the right intention. But if it is a structure that needs some help, it can work, and your intention is in the right place. But it's not the tool itself that is the problem. Because even with the tools, no one can say, everyone can say nothing real, basically. So if the leader is like sighs every time they hear something, or they get cold and hard, people can feel that and they stop contributing. So I think for us as HR, we can really support leaders when we coach and train them to not only give feedback, ask for feedback, but how to receive it, right? And that can be more structured training, but also debriefing after a difficult meeting, like, hey, did you notice you cut her off 3 times, right? And also I think a very powerful one is supporting repair. So to acknowledge that maybe something went wrong, and to call it out, right? Also openly, like, oh, I'm sorry for that. I'm committed to improving that. I had the chance to think about it. I want to take it back. That type of repair can be very humbling, but is also very powerful in restoring psychological safety in teams. And also for those of you who kind of work in more like international context with a foreign headquarter is that you can be really the bridge of translating things that come from your headquarters to push back or to question whether that works for your regional and local teams. So yeah, to kind of conclude, I know this is not easy, and you are in the middle of it, but I believe that you can see the patterns, design the system, even if you don't control it. So if we start with noticing, we start with ourselves and the systems that can highlight these biases, we can shed light on it and guide our leaders. Because I believe that you are the experts at your company cultures, at influencing, and you understand your stakeholders the best. So you hold a key position in being able to influence that psychological safety in your organizations. And I believe that is where we can start. Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle, for the wonderful session. I love the story about May and Daniel, right? I think it happens a lot in organizations, but with a system which helps to set up sort of to foster a psychological safe environment, so employees are able to get their promotion because of their performance, not because of their being outspoken and so on. I think that is good. And also, you also mentioned about the measurements, about the system being set up to foster such a culture. I think that is really good. And lastly, we start with noticing, start with awareness, right? We don't know what we don't know. But now we know what we don't know, what we didn't know, then we'll start working on it. I think that is wonderful, wonderful. I do have a question for you, Danielle. What would be if we do set up a culture, right? If we try to put together a system to set up a culture, according to experience, what is the most challenging part?
Well, the thing is that we talk about culture and strategy often as something that we can just define, right? Like we sit down and we brainstorm and say, oh, this is what we would like it to look like. And we like to do that because we can control it, right? But culture is not something that we want or can necessarily define. It's really the sum of all the experiences that is actually really happening, right? So there is a gap between reality and aspiration typically, right? So if as leaders and HR professionals, we want to play a role in shaping culture, right? Like this is where we want to be, our North Star. We need to honestly look at where we are today and what might be kind of the steps we need to take there, right? And that is why I say we need to start with noticing, because as confrontational as some of these things are, and today, there is many things we could work on. A culture is very broad, but if we're talking about psychological safety and cultural biases, as we did today, we need to be willing to honestly confront ourselves with the reality and understand what might be in the way of creating the culture, essentially, which is the experience that our employees have. So I think we need to start there. Otherwise, it will just be a vision, which is beautiful, but it's not what the employees really feel.
Start noticing, right? That's very good. So for those who are watching our session today, just feel free to put your questions or comments in the comment box, and Danielle will make sure that all these questions are comments and answered. Okay, that's very nice. So, Danielle, throughout your I understand that you do have a lot of projects on psychological safety, right, with your clients. So, under what circumstances would client request you to put together this project for them? Did they have something not pleasant happened. That's why they wanted to have this kind of system in place, to have this culture in place, or other reasons.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, as a business, right, we do not sell, psychological safety or trainings as a product, right? But it's more in the context of working together with
Mm.
international companies, and that can be either, business leaders or also HR, where they notice a friction, right? So
Mm.
they don't come to us and say, oh, we have a cultural problem, or oh, we have a psychological safety problem. But they'll say, like, oh, people keep leaving here, or, we have told them 10 times this is what we expect, but they are not doing it. And we have given them this training and those benefits, right? So there is, it's like I said, like, there's a gap between the aspiration and where they are, and they're experiencing friction, and they can't quite articulate or understand why that is happening. And often that is because of different communication styles, or like kind of
Mm.
cultural expectations, right, where they say, oh, but they could just tell us, they could just speak up if they wanted to, right? But it's not quite as simple as that. So whilst we don't do like explicit projects, that is like always implicitly present in this kind of cross-cultural context. So through our work, which is very execution and advisory based, we try to guide leaders, also a kind of internet, like global HR, to be more sensitive and considerate of these things, right? So I think it's decision by decision and situation by situation, rather than large kind of big scale initiatives, right? So to make so how you develop your benefits, for example, the kind of terms and conditions you put into the contract, how you support flexibility for family, for different celebrations, or for prayer, even, for example, prayer times. Or also, just as a manager, how in the interactions with your team, you can learn more about your team and what they want, or also learn to listen more, right? And then
Mm.
through that, slowly shape the way you communicate your team in a way that is essentially what you want to be more effective, right? In your cooperation with your team. So the good
Yeah.
intentions are usually there, right? The outcome that we want is to be more productive and collaborative, right? So I think everyone wants the same thing. It is just that the way we get there might be a bit different. And I think sometimes we need to help guide to see that, to become more aware that that intention is actually there,
Mm.
that we all share.
Okay, start with a good intention. Again, we have to start noticing, right? Be aware of what has happened in the environment. Okay, so that's towards the end of our session. So, any closing remarks for us, Danielle?
Yeah, so, my name is here on the slide. If anyone, wants to have a chat with me about these topics, I'm very passionate about it. So do feel free to reach out. I appreciate we have a very international audience here. So, you might identify as, any of the groups that I have mentioned. But yeah, I just want to encourage you, when we are thinking about psychological safety or wellness, to really ask, whose safety do we care about, right? And to be really honest about that, no matter in which group you fall, and then to see just in whichever so small way you today or tomorrow can contribute to making our workplaces a safer environment for everybody.
Wow, very nice, very nice. Whose safety are we talking about? Okay, and so that we can live in a better world. Wow, that's very nice. Okay, so thank you so much, everyone, for watching our session today. And we will continue with our session next Wednesday, the same time. For our session next week, we are going to talk about change management. But the way the speaker do it is a bit special. She's going to share what the system and also the micro habits of the employees. So here, I would love to wish everybody the very best in the 2026 and see you next Wednesday. Thank you, Danielle. Thank you. Bye.